Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Always a pleasure to be back.
So for today's deep dive, we're going to be looking at some stuff from Justice Kofi.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. So a listener wrote in and shared this excerpt with us, and it's all about like weathering the storms of life.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and he uses this really cool metaphor about like Jonah situations,
Oh.
from the Bible.
Right, Jonah and the whale.
Right. But what's interesting is he kind of focuses less on the whale part of the story and more on like what the crew does when they're in the middle of this crazy storm.
Oh, I see.
So, Jonah's disobeyed God. He's running away and he gets on this ship and then bam, huge storm hits.
Yeah, classic Jonah.
Right. And the crew, they're freaking out.
Of course, who wouldn't be?
They're throwing cargo overboard like they're desperate to save the ship.
Makes sense. They're trying everything they can think of.
Exactly, but nothing's working.
So what's Justice Kofi's take on this?
Well, this is where it gets interesting. So while all this is happening, Jonah's asleep.
He's asleep. Seriously.
Yeah, like totally oblivious to the chaos he's caused.
Wow, talk about adding insult to injury.
Right. And this is the parallel Justice Kofi wants us to see.
Okay, I'm curious.
Are there Jonahs in our own lives?
People who are like unknowingly causing us trouble.
Exactly.
That's something to think about.
So how do we even begin to identify these Jonahs?
That's a good question.
Justice Kofi suggests we start by looking at our relationships.
Okay, makes sense.
Specifically, relationships that have a negative impact on us.
Like draining us or stressing us out?
Yeah, like think about your finances, your spirituality, your overall sense of peace.
Right. Those are pretty big areas of life.
If there's a relationship that's constantly causing problems in one of those areas, that could be a sign of a Jonah situation.
So it's not just about like huge blowouts or anything like that.
Not necessarily. It could be more subtle, like a consistent drain on your energy or resources.
I see, like a slow leak instead of a burst pipe.
Exactly. And those could be even harder to spot because they're not so in your face.
That's true. You might not even realize it's happening until you take a step back.
Right. And that's where Justice Kofi's advice gets really practical.
How so?
He asks us to think about the people in our lives and ask ourselves, are they concerned about the impact they're having on me?
Oh, that's a good question to ask.
It is. Because if they're not, if they're kind of like Jonah, sleeving through the storm, that's a red flag.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a problem.
I actually had a situation like this with a friend a while back.
Really?
Yeah, he was constantly borrowing money, but never paying it back.
Oh, I've been there.
It created so much tension and resentment.
Yeah, I bet.
And I finally realized I had to address the issue for my own well-being.
So what did you do?
I had to have a tough conversation with him about it.
That couldn't have been easy.
It wasn't, but it was necessary.
And what happened?
Well, he wasn't happy about it at first.
I can imagine.
But ultimately, I had to prioritize my own peace of mind.
That makes sense. You can't let someone else's behavior drag you down.
Exactly. And that's what Justice Kofi is getting at with this whole Jonah analogy.
He's saying sometimes you have to make tough choices for your own good.
Yeah, just like the crew had to make the tough choice to throw Jonah overboard.
Right. It wasn't easy for them, but it was the only way to calm the storm.
And that's the thing. It's not about blaming others for all our problems.
No, it's about taking responsibility for our own well-being.
And recognizing that sometimes letting go of a relationship, even if it's hard, can be the best thing for us.
It's like pruning a plant. Sometimes you have to cut away dead branches to make room for new growth.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks. So we've talked about how this turbulence can show up in our relationships.
Right. And Justice Kofi specifically mentions finances, spirituality, and personal peace.
Yeah, he's saying these are some of the key areas where Jonahs can really wreak havoc.
Can you give us some examples of how that might look in each area?
Sure, let's start with finances. Imagine you've got a business partner who's always making risky investments.
Okay, I can see where that could be a problem.
Right, they're putting your financial stability at risk, and they don't seem to care.
That's a classic Jonah situation.
It is, and it can be really hard to deal with, especially if you're close to the person.
It's tough to disentangle yourself from those kinds of situations.
It is, but sometimes it's necessary to protect yourself.
Absolutely. Now, what about spirituality? How might a Jonah show up in that area?
Well, think about a mentor or spiritual leader who undermines your faith or discourages your spiritual practices.
Oh, wow, I haven't thought about that.
Yeah, it can be really subtle, but it can have a huge impact on your spiritual being.
It's like they're chipping away at your foundation without you even realizing it.
Exactly.
Right.
And then, of course, there's personal peace.
That's a big one.
It is, and it can be affected by all sorts